Welcome to A Place of Yes, a podcast about how I moved through my darkest hour. And for me, that was in channeling my grief into good. Welcome to the show.
This special episode was recorded live at Northshire Books on June 26th. It features a heartfelt conversation with Casey Mulligan Walsh about her memoir, The Full Catastrophe. In front of a live audience, Casey and I talk about grief, resilience, and what it's like to rebuild after loss. We share stories, reflections, and some real moments about navigating change, finding where we belong, and how storytelling can help us heal. Since it's in front of a live audience, the audio quality is a little bit different than usual. I hope you enjoy this episode.
I am so happy to get to welcome Casey Mulligan Walsh to the store this evening to talk about her memoir, The Full Catastrophe. Her work has appeared in publications including the New York Times and HuffPost. Her essay Still, published in Slit Lip, was nominated for Best of the Net, and she's a founding editor of In a Flash Literary Magazine. She also serves as an ambassador and on the board of the Family Heart Foundation, an organization dedicated to raising awareness of the genetic lipid disorder that has affected her family across generations. She will be interviewed this evening by Heather Straughter, the host of the podcast A Place of Yes. Heather founded the nonprofit organization Jake's Help from Heaven in 2011 to create opportunities for individuals with complex medical needs and disabilities to thrive. You can learn more about her work at jakeshelpfromheaven.org. Please join me in welcoming them both to Northshire.
Well, first of all, thank you all for being here today. For those of you who know me, anytime there's an event like this, I'm always convinced 0 people will show up. So the fact that there are people here, I'm grateful to all of you. This is really exciting for A Place of Yes because Christine, who's in the back, is the producer of the show and the owner of Brightsided. And we have had these conversations about how fun it would be to have a live recording. It was always just kind of like a pipe dream. Like, how would we do this? Where would we do it? And then when Casey and I got connected through people who listen to the show and through other guests of the show, we thought it would be kind of cool because she has so many local connections. Wouldn't it be great if we did something at Northshire? And thank you to Rachel and her team and everybody. Here we are. So thank you guys for showing up. And thank you, Casey, for making this work. So Casey, will you share a little bit about the book?
Yes, I suppose I should have tested the mic before I had to talk. Yes, I'm so thrilled to see all of you here. It's just delightful. And I know it's, there's plenty of other things you could be doing. Northshire is such a beautiful space. And so I'm really grateful to Rachel also. My book, The Full Catastrophe, great big picture of it over there on the left, is it's my story of the search for belonging after repeated loss, navigating uncertainty, which we all have to do in life, and learning to live with grief beside joy. I was orphaned at 12, and I lost my only sibling at 20, and that set me off on basically a search for home that rose above every other goal I had in life. And so I married young, and I did create that family I dreamed of. I had 3 children, but when my marriage began to crumble, I embraced a new spirituality, kind of a new way to see the world that became a lifeline during a very hostile divorce. But then the unthinkable happened. My oldest son died at 20 in Cambridge, New York, in a car accident. And of course, that loss was devastating. But the spiritual strength I cultivated during those 2 years or so leading up to his death became something that really helped me navigate my grief and helped me find finally a deeper sense of belonging. And I'd say that through it all, what I learned is that life rarely goes as planned, which most of you know by now, but that even in the most heartbreaking circumstances, there's room for unexpected hope and peace and even joy. And it's really about embracing the full catastrophe of life, the highs and the lows, the struggles and the joys, that helps us understand, that this messy life is the life that we have and the life that we want.
Thank you, Casey. So I wanted to start this by reading an excerpt from the book. Some of you will really relate to it. It is a part that stuck with me and it made me want to keep reading. And it made me laugh out loud a little bit because I have been in a similar situation to this. I know Brian has been in a similar situation to this. It's that weird mix of things that happen when you've lost someone really important. So I'm just going to start by reading this. I'm listening to Sondheim and wading through a sea of bills when the phone rings. Eric Simonson, please. Sorry, he's not here. We're calling about a $60 check he wrote to Price Chopper on October 7th, 1998. It was returned for insufficient funds. Seriously? That was 9 months ago. With fees, he now owes $82. If he doesn't pay right now, it goes to our lawyer. I drop into my worn-out computer chair and stare out the bank of windows in the backyard. Hello? How can we get in touch with him? Glancing at the sympathy cards and still unopened boxes of thank you notes stacked on the side table, I mumble, he's dead. Dead? I detect a note of skepticism. Yeah, dead. He died on June 12th. I have to remind myself that Eric isn't away at college or basic training, that he won't burst through the door at any moment calling, "What's for dinner, Mom?" or "Sorry for your loss." The voice in the phone jars me back to the present. Just send us a copy of the death certificate. No. It falls out of my mouth before I can even have time to think. No. Ma'am, we'll need a copy of the death certificate. My words come out in a rush. Sorry, I'm not sending you one. It's public record. What are you going to do? Have him arrested? Week after week, well into the fall, I answer the phone to hear a new caller with the same familiar request. We're looking for Eric Simonson. You're going to have a hard time reaching him. Would you like us to stop calling? You bet. Then send us a death certificate. Sorry, nope. Talk to you soon. I can't pin down the complicated feelings those calls evoke. As annoying as they are, these requests remind me, Eric's still my son. I'm still his mother. And that last piece was what I really related to, because I think grief does this really weird thing when you have to exist in this world where you have to kind of be normal, but people are putting you in these positions of trying to balance it. It's hard to exist when we lose people who are so important to us. So Casey, I want to start with, like, when you think back on that time and what stands out to you now, like because I kind of feel like I've had those moments. So what stands out to you?
So part of this comes from the prologue of the book, and part of what's interspersed with this scene is the idea that I'd spent, it's really kind of the theme of the whole book, that since losing my parents really young, had spent most of my life just trying to fit in, trying to kind of twist myself, prove that I belonged. And then leading up to this, my son's death, we'd had about 2 years of a lot of trauma in our family, a very stressful, very hostile divorce, and and anybody who's been through anything like that knows I spent so much time proving everything, every bill, every communication with the school, that I was the parent that had, cared for their medical needs, all of those things. And so when this call came, it was all of the feelings, right? I was still deep in grief. It was only 6 weeks or so after Eric had died. Because of what I'd been through leading up to his death, I had more peace than you might imagine. It was in a kind of a sort of Zen place, which is, I know, maybe hard to understand, but when you read the lead up, I think, you understand it. But then when this call came in, it suddenly hit me that I didn't have to prove anything to anyone. And there was finally nothing left to prove. And it was actually a little freeing and almost exhilarating to be able to say no. I hadn't been able to say no in so long.
I love it. I like I said, it hooked me. I related to it. One of the things we talk about a lot on the show, and that I think is so important, is talking about our people. So can you share with us a little bit about Eric, like who he was, how he lived, what you missed the most?
Yes, of course, I'm happy to. Well, anybody who's had, raised a child from birth to 20 knows there are a lot of different people at a lot of different times. His basic personality from the time he was old enough to walk and run was that he was very gregarious, sort of charismatic. He was that baby in the restaurant that was charming the people at the next table, and they'd end up holding him. And he definitely had ADHD, but was the sensory seeking type. So he liked risk and danger. And one of the working titles for the book, although I really always kind of knew it should be The Full Catastrophe, was Big Air, because he was a snowboarder and a water skier and a soccer player. And the more dangerous and the more risky, the better for him. And so he was an interesting mix of that outgoing quality on the outside, but truly very sensitive on the inside. And I think sometimes people who are like that, they suffer more in a way because they want to hide that sensitive nature. He was that kid in high school who had literally like 15 phone calls a night from girls who all thought that they were his best friend, not girlfriends, but, they all called Eric. He was 20 when he died. And so, like, I think we all know kids like this who don't make that transition from kind of star high school soccer player to young adult life as smoothly as we'd like them to. And then for him, there were a lot of stressors happening all at one time that contributed to the fact that he was a very different kid at 19 and 20 than he had been earlier. And I believe that, who knows, but he got caught at a difficult time, and most of our kids go through something and they get to grow up and they get to, go back and mend fences and develop a fully rounded adult personality. And so, he got caught at a difficult time and wasn't able to do that.
It's the hardest part, I think, about losing someone, right? Or just about death in general. It just happens and there's no going back.
Right.
So you've experienced so many layers of loss. It's Eric, but it's your parents and it's your brother. I mean, it's a stupid question, but how has that impacted your life, right? Like, it's got to impact it huge.
Wow. Well, there has been a lot of loss. You process loss very differently at 11 and 12 and even 20 when you're just almost an adult, kind of, than later. Although when Eric died, one of the things that I did say was, I have way too much practice at this, right? Like, it was part of my DNA that people die. And when my brother died at 20, when I was 20, he was 27, he had a heart attack. I kind of skipped over denial and bargaining. Like, it's the first time I realized that it was just so integral a part of me that I wasn't like, oh, of course he dies, everybody in my family dies. It was just more like, yeah, people die, So that by the time Eric died, I had a really deep sense of knowing that meant that I was going to carry this for the rest of my life and you don't go back. But in the writing, I think balancing the light and the dark isn't necessarily easier, but it's concrete. You see it in print, and it's really important. Nobody wants to read misery memoir, as I often say. And so I did have to go back in there and really insert some more cheerful scenes because the trauma that happened in our family was more recent than the times that were happy. It was easier to access that difficult part at first than it was to go all the way back. But I started writing about what I couldn't remember, and in writing about what I couldn't remember, I remembered it. So that worked out. In life, I think it's just that from the time I was little, there was upheaval. My parents were both sick. We moved a lot, and then they died. And I think, internalized that you just do what's in front of you that day. And I didn't even know the word resilience till I was like in my 40s. I'd never heard of it. I didn't know it was a thing. I also didn't even consider that maybe I could go off the rails and, because I was, somebody would have to clean up that mess. And so I was too worried about that. But I do think also that kind of spiritual shift that I discuss in the book makes it it's not easy. It's never easy for any of us, but it takes less time in trauma and upheaval now, or when I'm grieving, to get back to a place where I can stay present and be grateful for now. And I feel very strongly that my son is still with me and he gives me signs all the time. So it's a path and a process.
So I love that. And for anyone who listens to the show knows I talk about this all the time. I love the signs, right? Like, yes, I'm all about them. What are some, like, how do you know Eric is with you?
Yes. So it's funny. He's not a rainbow or a butterfly or a cardinal or a dragonfly to me. Back to like an irreverent teen in the 90s, right? It's 90s music all the time, significant music at significant times that I just laugh, like, okay, I knew you'd be here. And then 11:11 on the clock. And my husband, who's here in the front row, used to think I was, he'd like roll his eyes. He is on board. He has seen this so many times where, I probably have a list of examples. Okay, here's a very quick one. last year was the 25th anniversary of his death. The day before, I think I was in the car and I heard this song that was, for any of you who loved music in the 90s, it was Beck's Loser. I was listening to it thinking, oh, this is totally, like, I don't know. This isn't a song I remember in my house, but this is totally the kind of song Eric would have been. He had this thing where he'd like rock out while he was driving the car. I just thought that. So the next day I had an errand to do, and it was the day that he had died. And I got back in the car and I turned on the radio, turned on the car, and it was 11:11, and that song was playing. So I went home and texted this girl who was really close with him, who still feels very connected to him. And I just texted, did Eric like Loser? And she wrote back half an hour later with like, yes, in all capital letters, all exclamation points. And I just like, those things they aren't sad for me. They aren't even bittersweet for me. They just make me laugh because it's like, I knew you'd be here. And, lots of signs like that.
Yeah. I love those. And I feel the same way. Like some people are like, oh, don't you get sad when you hear this or whatever. I'm like excited by it. So one of the things with grief, so I'm sticking with the grief theme, is it can feel so isolating. And it's funny coming off that question because I do think people who live with grief can learn how to balance it with the joy. That the two things can be true. You can have great joy and great sadness all within you at the same time. But that loneliness is real. Even if you're grieving with someone else and with a family, I still feel like grief is really personal. Like the way that I respond, the way that it hits me, can be very different than like what Brian is doing or what anyone else. Like it just, and I'm not always really nice about it, frankly. Like when I'm in it, like I'm in it.
Yeah.
How do you handle your grief? Like how do you live with it side by side?
Yeah.
Like did writing this story help you?
Yes. Well, one quick comment about the first part of that is that my husband now didn't know my son. My stepkids didn't know him. Most of my friends now never knew him. So that in itself is quite isolating, right? I have 2 other children and they, my daughter was 12 when he died. His brother, who's actually a chef in Saratoga, was 17 and was with Eric until not long before he died. So they all have their own grief and their own way that they handle it. And over the last 25 years, the way they felt about it has changed. And so some of the time my son doesn't really want to talk about it, But I will say that writing the book, my son is the one that actually read the entire manuscript. And it was a really good jumping off point for some conversations. He also said, which is totally valid, but I really respect the fact that he knew this and I didn't have to tell him, is that he could get back in there and rewrite every scene a different way, because that's not how it happened for him. But he does understand that, it's my memoir. That's how it happened for me. So I have a lot of respect for that. But when it comes to other people, like the general, capital P public, it's been just so rewarding and to hear from people who, like, none of us has exactly the same story, but I feel like my story has so many points, sadly, of intersection, whether it's parent loss or sibling loss or child loss, whether it's a difficult divorce or parenting difficult children or children who are struggling, or any one of a myriad of other things. And to hear people say that it, was comforting to them or whatever, that they took anything from it, that they feel less alone, it makes me feel less alone. And I think that's the beauty of whether you're writing or talking or having a relationship with someone, is that you feel less alone and that you increase people's empathy.
So there's 2 things I want to say about that. One is that it's so interesting to me that, because you said something that I think about a lot, how so many of your friends now and like your life now, like it's something that I struggle with sometimes, is that there's this whole life, this beautiful life, but they don't know Jake.
I'm going to interrupt because one of the things I'll put this question to you, but one of the things that I write about is the summer, really not long after this phone call, that same summer, there was a day where I just felt like I could go into his room and start, boxing things up. And 2 things struck me while I was doing that. And, one of them was that we all go through this, all of us who have lost children. When people ask me how many children I have, what will I say? We all know that, and I have a whole story about that. But the other one was, anybody I meet from here on in won't have known Eric, and how could they possibly know me? And so
hard.
I mean, I could ask you that question, but it goes without saying.
So many people don't know who I was then.
Right.
because it feels like the only person I am.
They don't know you, and they didn't know Jake too. So there's like a twofold part to that. And Eric had such a big personality. It just seemed so, I mean, not that like if it was any of my kids, it wouldn't have mattered, but he left a big like space in the room. He was one of those of my three. He took up a lot of air in the room, when he was there.
And I've thought about this kind of a lot. So your book is out there. Anybody who reads it, they know everything about you, right? So it's like they're traveling in this world with people who know things about you that you know nothing about them. And I struggle with that a little bit too. And not that whoever's listening to the podcast knows a lot about me. But then it's weird. It's a weird feeling if I let myself get in my head. So like it must be even bigger with a book. Like you're winning awards. It's a great book. People know you and you don't know them. How do you balance that?
I think that I felt like if I were going to write a memoir, I had to be vulnerable. Otherwise, why write a memoir, right? If I really wanted this to speak to people or help them, it's not a self-help book, but, I was about as low as you can go. And sometimes we just need to read stories of other people that, like, very cliche, but like walked through the fire, right? I don't know that I think that a lot. I think that I just am so honored when people get in touch with me, or whether they write it in a review or I get emails or whatever and say, it really touched me on this level and this level. And as I said before, it's not only about grief, although all the things I mentioned really are grief, even if someone didn't die. But no, I guess what I would say is that I decided to write this. And I spent a lot of years working on it.
I know I said that was the last question, but I'm going to say one more thing. I do think that thing you talked about, though, all of the intersections, because I think back to when Jake first died, and maybe the world existed, but I just didn't know. We are in a world right now where, we're here talking about grief. I'm on a podcast. There's so many memoirs about it. Like, there's so many opportunities in which to share this and not feel alone. And I don't know about you, but in the beginning, I felt really alone. Like I was like, I didn't know anybody else who had a child who died. Like I just thought I was like the elephant in every single room. And now it feels less so.
Part of that, as much as we, all need to get off our phones, there is this super connection that happens if you're in the right spaces. And, Eric died. What year did Jake die?
Jake died in 2010.
Okay, so it was over 10 years between our losses. And if you think about what our connection was to the rest of the world in 1999 versus 2010, think about how much less isolated I would have felt now. And also by virtue of being in this writing community and super connected to people all over the country and in some cases all over the world that I feel like I know really well and I've never met them. But just, I worked in Troy. I lived in Cambridge, New York. I would come home on a weekend sometimes and just be alone the whole weekend because my other two kids were in flux. And it was very sad, depressing time and very isolating. And I just think if I'd had, I think that the internet has opened up so much to us. Even the idea that I could write an essay and somebody would want to publish it. I had no idea.
So I think we can open it up to questions.
I'm curious about the timing when you say 1999. Was there an event in your life that inspired you to begin writing your memoir?
So it wasn't so much that there was an event or I just, the light came on and I had inspiration. It was more that, he died in 99. I remarried in 2002, moved from Cambridge eventually to West Sam Lake down near Albany. And I was kind of in the process of, getting my new life stable and going. And then we had a couple of grandkids and there was a wedding in there. There was a family wedding in March of 2011. And honestly, I thought when all of this is over, I could go to therapy or I could write. So I think I'll write. So I started in Troy with Marion Roach Smith, who used to teach in person there, and a couple of people who were in that group with me are here, and we've been writing together and friends for 14 years now, so some things do last. And that's the first time I ever wrote like a creative nonfiction essay. The way she ran her class was, you have 20 copies and you pass it out. It's really scary. And then you read it aloud and everybody writes their comments, including her. Then a group of us formed a writing group and we met every 2 weeks for 7 years. So basically every 2 weeks for 7 years, I wrote an essay because I was not going to show up without an essay. And somewhere in there, about 2017 is when then I thought, I think this really is the story that should be a book. And oh, maybe I could just make it a collection of essays, but I knew this story needed a narrative arc. It's kind of the classic hero's journey structure. And I'm glad, but from writing, beginning to write in 2011, it took 12 years. And I got a book deal in 2023. So that's how that happened.
What about the process of reading it as you're preparing to submit it, like, editing and rereading? Was that emotional for you? Or
it's funny. People will ask me a variation of that question, which is, or they'll say, like, you're a brave writer. And I always say it was brave to live it. Like, it was satisfying to write it. I was not emotional most of the time writing it, which I think has a lot to do with how long I didn't start writing until like 12 years after most of the events in the book. And then I wrote over the course of 12 years. So of course, that there's a lot of the perspective and the forgiveness and things that are in the book now may not have been in the book 5 years ago even. But when I am emotional, sometimes is when I read it.
It feels like you had grief after grief after grief after grief. And if someone out there is listening to this, and they're feeling that too, do you have advice for them? What would you say to them if they feel like they're in that deep, dark hole right now?
Yeah, that's such a hard question, isn't it? We all wish we just had that beautiful answer. I have some books that I just love, not memoirs, because when you're deep in grief, you don't really have the bandwidth to read, pick up somebody else's story and read. But there are books like Megan Reardon Jarvis's Can Anyone Tell Me? That I just think is a fabulous book for people who are grieving, even if they're new in grief, and also for the support person. Like if you care for someone, there's a section in each of her sections about if you're the support person, here's what you can do. Because we all, even those of us like me who have had loss after loss after loss, I don't just automatically know the right. We all struggle, and it's different for everyone, and we don't want to offend anybody, but then not doing anything isn't the right thing either. So I think for me, it was just putting one foot in front of the other. Honestly, like there were days that were dark and difficult, and I just somehow believed they would get better, although I had no idea how that was going to happen, and I could not see it. I think we all wish we had a great answer for someone who's in that, except sometimes you just really have to feel it and go through it. But then also, I think therapy is also really important.
I think people are afraid sometimes to let themselves get dark or feel. And I'm always a big believer in that's the world, right? Like some days you wake up in the morning and it sucks and you feel all the feels and you just don't even want to deal with it. But that's not every day. When you wake up and it's not a great day, it's okay. Mm-hmm. But then the next day, it can be better.
But then it's also okay when you do have a happy day. And that in the beginning, I think that's hard, right? I had this dark night of the soul period, right, leading up to Eric's death, where there were times I felt like maybe I wouldn't have a relationship with any of my kids because the divorce was so hostile and they were all struggling. And so, like we do that anticipatory grief when someone's ill, I really let go of Eric little by little in those years leading up to his death for various reasons. But I found this place that I could only get to in little spurts where I realized that we're all connected and we'll always be connected, whether we're here in body or not, and that we're not separate. We really already have everything we need within us if we could just lift the veil for a minute and see that. And I have very specific memories of times that I was at my worst, like in the bed, couldn't get up. And at some moment one particular moment that came home to me, and it was like the weight was lifted. And I think it's hard to live there all the time, but if you know it exists, you can get back there a little easier. There's a little scene in my book when those of you who've been in Saratoga for a very long time remember Pyramid Mall. And I was in Cambridge, and it's like he died on Saturday. We didn't have the services until the following weekend. And on Thursday, it's like I have to go get a dress. I need a dress to wear. So I think I came to like the Bonton, or there's this whole subplot where I had rehearsed what I was going to say if the woman asked, what event is this for? And I would say, my son is the boy that died in Cambridge, and she didn't ask. And I was a little disappointed, but I put on the dress that I ended up getting, and I didn't want, it ended up being cream and black, but I didn't want everybody in black. I wanted a joyful day. And I put on that dress and looked in the mirror with that surreal moment and said to myself, yes, you're buying a dress to bury your son, but you're going to go on and have happy times in this dress too. It was hard to render that in the book because a lot of people, it was a tragic sudden loss, and they wonder how you could even think those things so quickly. But for me, and this is part of why I thought this was a book, is that I just had this really unusual experience of kind of grieving Eric or letting go of him in pieces for a couple of years leading up to when he actually died. And so the day that he died, I don't mean like I knew it was going to happen, but there was just this deep sense of inevitability it's very hard to explain, which is why it took me 12 years to write the book.
How does your heart let you love when you've had so many losses?
I never saw that as a conflict. I think that part of it is I spent so much of my life feeling alone or being afraid of being alone or, feeling abandoned for obvious reasons that I was just looking all over the place for that love, right? I wasn't avoiding it. It was what I wanted, to the point that I get married and I have my kids and they're my family, and like we all laugh at this, but they have to love you, right? Getting that love became the most important thing in my life. To the detriment of continuing my education right out of high school and all those things. It's just, as I said, even not that many years after I did that, I needed a family more than I needed an education. And this, I'm glad you asked that, Janice, because this circles back around to, I forget what we were talking about, but we were talking about this a little bit before we started. I don't know if it's surprising to me that both of us are real connectors and people. And I was laughing that we'll stay in touch afterward, but you probably stay in touch with everybody afterward. And I tend to be the same too. I think maybe I'm just a relationship gatherer.
So thank you very much, everybody who came.
Thank you so much for joining the special live episode with Casey Mulligan Walsh. I hope you enjoyed our conversation. If her story resonated with you, I highly recommend picking up her memoir, The Full Catastrophe. It's honest, moving, and beautifully written. And as always, if you enjoyed this episode, please consider leaving a review, sharing it with a friend, or subscribing so you don't miss the next one. And lastly, a huge thank you to Northshire Books. You hosted us, and you made everyone feel welcome. It means a lot.
Thank you for listening to A Place of Yes. Please follow us wherever you listen to your podcasts. If you really like this episode, please share it with a friend. It would make a world of difference if we could just reach more people and share the work that we do and the stories we want to tell. Thank you so much for watching.